Hey everyone, welcome to the tips and tricks session for January of 2025. This session, we're going to be looking at the data import tool. So the data import tool is something that we've gotten a lot of questions about lately, so I thought it'd be good to do a tips and tricks on it. Um, this is a simple way for importing data that originally lived outside of REDCap into a REDCap project. So this is an import method that doesn't require any programming experience, anything like that, which would be required to use the API. It essentially will provide you with a spreadsheet template so that you can organize your data for import. It will bring the data into REDCap, check it for common issues like incorrectly formatted data, data fields that are necessary that are missing, um, and it'll allow you to review the data that is prepared to be imported before the updates are made to your project. So I'm going to hop into my test project here, and let's just look at the data import tool. So data import tool, you access it from your left-hand sidebar here. It is a user privilege that can be toggled on or off. So under user rights, you will need to have data import tool checked in order to use data import tool. So if you're not seeing it on this left sidebar here, it's because you don't have user rights for it. And whoever has control over user rights in your project needs to update that if you're supposed to be using it. So here is the data import tool. So this is where you will get your template from. The default template has records as rows and variables as columns and is in a format called CSV. It essentially functions like a spreadsheet, but you can't use some of the fanciest features in Excel in it. You need to end up with plain text in your CSV document. You also have the option to download other file formats like semicolon separated and tab separated. Um, and you can also switch your formats around. So you can have your records be columns and your variables be rows, whichever format your data is already in, is the one I would go with because that makes copying and pasting easier. And the settings that we have for our data import, you can choose to import either in real time or as a background process. So background processes can be really helpful if you've got a large data set. Um, Displaying the data comparison table. So that means that this toggle is about when you have your data uploaded, does REDCap show you the data before it saves it, let you do a final check? It is faster to not have REDCap do that. However, the additional error check I find is very valuable. So I usually have it toggled to display the data comparison table. Auto-numbering versus overwriting record IDs. So you can either have REDCap use the record ID column, use the record IDs that you've listed in your document, or you can have it auto-generate them. Either way, you will have to associate a record ID with each row, even if it's just a placeholder, because REDCap needs to know which row goes with which. REDCap needs to know where to draw the line between different records. And this will become clearer later on when we go into repeating forms and longitudinal projects, but it needs that record ID filled out to be able to manage the data appropriately. But it can either, automatically generate new record numbers, or it can stick to the ones that you've provided. If it sticks to the ones that you've provided and another record already has that number, it'll try to overwrite. So this is using the record name provided is really useful if you're trying to add new data to records that already exist. Like if I, imported data at my baseline and now it's been 6 months, I need to import my 6-month data. That's really helpful to use the record names provided, make sure I've lined those up with my existing records so that I update the right record with the right information. But there is, there is the risk that if I go to add a new record and I've made a mistake with that, I can end up overwriting a lot of data really fast. So if you're going to use the record names provided, again, very useful in a lot of circumstances, but you want to double check that. If I'm allowing it to auto number, that does increase the possibility that I'll accidentally duplicate records as I'm importing new information, but it also decreases the risk of accidentally overwriting data. So honestly, if I'm importing new data wholesale, completely new patients, I tend to do the auto number. Um, I want to avoid as much as possible the risk of overwriting my data. Um, the other overwriting related toggle that we've got here is whether to overwrite data with blank values. So that means if I say yes to this, yes, blank values in the file will overwrite existing file values. That means that if I have left a field blank, like let's say I've left a date of birth field blank on my import spreadsheet, I will, and I have, it toggled to overwrite data with blank values, I'm going to erase my date of birth value for that person when I import their data. Most of the time, I have it ignoring the blank values because, you don't always, most of the time I have REDCap ignore the blank values because I don't want to have to fill out every single variable, especially if I'm, importing new information to an existing record. I don't want to have to mess with it. I don't want to have to, um, fill out every single column every single time. Um, So I usually have it ignore the blank values. And then, you just have your format settings like whether your records are in rows or columns. Is this a CSV, TSV? Um, and then the year, the date and date time values. So you have to pick a format for your dates. You can either make them all month, day, year, or you can make them all day, month, year. But that month and day order has to be picked consistently, and you have to keep it consistent through your entire data set in order for REDCap to understand and import those dates. So you want to make sure that your date formatting is consistent as you're building your project, and that is consistent as you're setting up your data for import. And we talked about how we can use either records as rows or records as columns and choose the format your data is already in. For the data import template, let's download the data import template for this and start looking at it. So I'm just going to go with the standard one here, download my data import template. File. So this is what my data import template looks like. So you can see here across the top, I've got columns for every single variable in my project. And then in rows is where I would put, record 1, 2, 3, 4, and start putting that information in. So the big trick here, there we go. That is a little trick in Excel that I just did. So I highlight everything and I get the field size cursor to come up. I double click and it adjusts all of my columns to the size of the size of whatever's already in there so that I can actually see my variable names. So the big trick with doing data import is that my data for import needs to end up in the exact same format that REDCap wants to read it on the back end. So let's compare my import template to my form as I've built it in the designer. So we're going to start here at patient information. So you can see first name, last name, date of birth, email. Those are reasonably easy. I copy and paste them. I'm using month, day, year, so I got to make sure I tell REDCap that I'm using month, day, year format when I import. Here on my medical history form is where it starts to get interesting because when I think about my real life data set and what it's going to look like, I've got this raw data that I put together. Your raw data that you're going to pull out of another system will probably look different than the format that it needs to end up in for REDCap. So you can see here, this is my primary cancer site column. I've got liver, stomach, colon, and colon. But that's not the format in which REDCap is going to understand this data. REDCap is going to understand the data for this field based on these value codes, these 1, 2, 3s, and 4s. That's what REDCap actually stores. So for my column that says CX primary, what I ultimately need to put in here are those 1, 2, 3s, and 4s based on what I have written in my raw data. So you can see here in my raw data form, what I do, I don't make any modifications to my template document. This is my import template. I'm just going to make my final copy and pastes in here and preserve the format exactly because I don't want to mess this up. So what I'll do is I'll take my columns, my variable names. You can see here, I've pasted that variable name, the CX primary, right next to the primary cancer site column. And that's where I've started assigning my data codes based on the information that's in my raw data spreadsheet. So my person with liver cancer has a value of 1 there. My person with stomach has a value of 2. And then my 2 people with colon cancer have values of 3 there. So this is what I'll actually copy and paste into that column that says CX primary. And I'm just going to grab their names and dates of birth real quick, or that basic information real quick. So I've got first name, last name, date of birth, and email. Cool. I have those in the right order because order does matter. But there we go. So I've got those guys in there. And I'm just going to resize my columns real quick. There we go. Okay. I don't have to fill out the completeness field at the bottom of these unless I want to. So at the bottom of the code book for each form, you'll see that it can be saved as 0 for incomplete, 1 for unverified, or 2 for complete. So you can update this information. Like I can make all of these unverified, let's say, because I've done my import, but I still want to do a check later. But I don't have to fill that out. If I don't fill it out, it defaults to incomplete. All right. And then continuing with my medical history section. So we can see here the primary cancer diagnosis date, like that's fine. Those are month, day, year. Cool. I can paste that right in. And you want to make sure as you're going, like, make sure you're not copy and pasting over other things. Make sure you're lining everything up right so that we still have everything associated with the right patients. Things get really interesting when you come to a checkbox field because a checkbox field, like it's a really nice visual format for data entry. And for data entry, it looks like one field. But on the very back end of REDCap, you've actually got, you can see here, essentially a different subfield for every option that you have listed. And these subfields can be either 0 for unchecked or 1 for checked. And so instead of having a column that says pre-CXDX, I have 6 columns, pre-CXDX, pre-CXDX 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is where life gets very interesting. So when I'm working with a checkbox in, oh no, I do want to keep that open. There we go. When I'm working with a checkbox for data import, what I'll do is I'll copy all of those columns. I'm actually going to copy this other column here too, CX other, because that's an other specify field that branches off of this. So it's part of the same step in my data conversion as far as the work I'm going to do. So I come back into my raw data sheet. And then what I do is I insert those copied columns. So now right next to my medical history field, I have all of my pre-cancer diagnosis fields. And I'm going to, once again, resize my columns so that I can just read everything. And now what I need to do, either in the designer or in the code book, is I need to know what each of my checkboxes means. So I need to know what option 1 means, option 2, option 3, option 4. And then I need to look through the medical history and be able to check off, okay, option one is diabetes. So for this column, one means they have diabetes, zero means they don't. Okay, yes, diabetes, no diabetes, yes, diabetes, no diabetes. And then now we've got cirrhosis. So I don't see cirrhosis there. Yes, cirrhosis, no cirrhosis, no cirrhosis. Um, for option three, Crohn's disease. All right. No Crohn's disease, no Crohn's disease, no Crohn's disease. Yes, Crohn's disease. Uh, celiac. Yes, celiac. No celiac. No celiac. No celiac. So you can see this can be a little bit time consuming. So it's up to you, whether this is something that you want to do by hand and more of a spreadsheet thing, if it's worth working with a data tool like R for you to make this data cleanup process simpler. There's different ways that you can do this. I'm just demoing how to do it off of the spreadsheets right now because this is the absolutely no programming required method. Anemia, no anemia. Yes, anemia. No anemia, no anemia. And then do we have any other cancer histories? All right, everyone's got a no for that. Cool. So 0, 0, 0, 0. And no one had an other cancer, so I don't have to put anything in my CX other field here. Because if you look here in the code book, you can see this CX other only becomes available if you have yes for other cancers. So REDCap expects it to be blank, and we are going to leave it blank for all these people. And then, just like I did with my other fields, I copy all of those ones and zeros in those columns. And I come back in here and I paste them in. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about values, not labels for the multiple choice and radios. The other trick is validation for text fields. So we kind of saw this with date fields. That is a type of validated text field. But we also, if we look at this labs form, have a lot of validated number fields. So with validated fields like that, I have to make sure that what I import at the end is something that can actually go into that field. So when I look at my raw data for their labs, what I have in REDCap is validated number fields. But if I look here at their blood urea nitrogen, the BUN, I don't just have numbers. I have units here. I have milligrams per deciliter. So I'm going to need to trim that off. And there's a little trick that I can do for that. So I will insert a new column here. And I'm basically going to do exactly what I've done to the left here with glucose. I'm going to split my units apart from my my numbers. So I do that by going into text to columns. I do want it delimited. I want to divide it with a space, and you can see down here that that carves off the units. All right, finish. That splits them. So now I have something that I can copy in that is just a number and that is going to be accepted in that validated number field. REDCap will actually be able to import that. So here on considerations, I'm going to jump right down to check your units. So when you are working with anything that has units, whether it's weights, whether it's labs, doesn't matter, determine at the beginning which units you're going to use and when you're going to make your conversions. Because not everything is going to allow, not every lab is going to measure in the exact same units. Sometimes there are multiple different versions of the same test, all this stuff. You do not want to shave off your units without paying attention to them. So the way that I've built things in this test project, you can see I've got things validated as numbers, and I've got units specified on my field. So if I'm doing it this way, I want to shave off my units, and I want to make sure before I import, before I separate all of that, that I have converted everything for glucose into milligrams per deciliter, everything for BUN into milligrams per deciliter. They need to be in the right units before I import. The advantage of working with this number field this way and doing my conversions first is that I will then I'll be able to make reports and charts throughout the life of the study. Because I have a validated number field, it'll be easy to work with. I can also set min-max ranges that will flag for me if I have an out of range value. The other option is to import with units and align your units later. The advantage of that, so that would be not validating these as number fields, not specifying units on them, and just importing all of my lab values the way they look right now. And then I can decide on my units and align everything later. The advantage of that is that then I have REDCap's logging documenting every change that my lab values have gone through, so that I'm able to have that accountability to go back and recheck my unit conversions. So you can either way, you're going to want to document the conversion in some way so that people don't mistakenly correct it later. And a lot of the time, your standard labs are going to be fairly consistent, like grams per deciliter for albumin and milligrams per deciliter for bilirubin, but especially if you've got an unusual lab. A lot of COVID studies that I worked on had D-dimer, and D-dimer was not a lab that people usually collected, and it comes in so many different units. And so doing the unit conversions for D-dimer was something that people didn't think about until very far through the study. And then I had to go back and clean all of that up because I was doing QA on that. So that's something to think about from the beginning. Really check your units, check what the different labs are using for units. Do not just shave these guys off from the D-dimer without aligning everything, or import these units together and then do your conversions in REDCap. Either one's fine, but you got to keep track of your units. Dropping units without performing necessary conversions to get everything in the same units is a very good way to lose important data or distort important data for your study. That's my check your units soapbox. Okay. Other considerations for when you're doing data import projects. So, readability. You want to give your fields names that will make sense when you see them in the CSV file. So if I was just naming all of my medical history fields, MH1, MH2, MH3, that wouldn't mean anything to me. I would be constantly lost and having to check my codebook incessantly to make sure that I was putting the right data into the right field. It's really helpful to have fields that are meaningful to me. So you can see here, CX primary. To me, that is primary cancer, cancer primary, cancer date, pre-cancer diagnoses. You might need to abbreviate things, because the other consideration is that when field names get too long, usually over 25 characters, you sometimes get import errors. You don't want to deal with that down the road. You want to give your fields short names from the beginning. So under 25 characters, feel free to abbreviate things, put underscores, whatever you need to do. But try to make sure that those field names are going to be meaningful to you. The other interesting consideration, so for something like that, that medical history, the pre-cancer diagnoses, is whether to put things in checkbox format or in a series of yes/no questions. Because I could split this into a series of yes/no questions. I could have diabetes, yes/no, cirrhosis, yes/no, Crohn's disease, yes/no, celiac, yes/no, anemia, yes/no, other cancer, yes/no. That would be 6 fields. And if people are doing direct data entry, the checkboxes are very nice and easy to use. But when you're looking at the back end like you are for data import, they're not really that different from each other. It's not that different from the difference between using a checkbox versus a series of yes/no. It's kind of moot. And sometimes using a series of yes/no fields, you might find makes things easier for prepping your data for import, because then I could have, instead of DX123, I might have pre-cancer diabetes, like pre-CX diabetes or pre-CX cirrhosis, pre-CX Crohn's disease. So those might be more readable for me and easier to make sure I'm not making mistakes on as I'm prepping data for import. So that's something to consider when you're doing these builds, is how is this data going to be completed, and what are your needs? What is easy for you? What is hard for you? What's going to be the most intuitive for you and your team? All right, so now I'm going to demonstrate the data import tool. Very exciting. So we're going to start off with a file that doesn't have any errors in it. So you can just see what it's supposed to do. All right. So here's import one with no errors. And I can actually just open that up so you can see what it looks like. So this is essentially my data import template, and it's just been filled out with all of the values. So you can see all my numbers in there. You can see the ones and zeros for my yeses and nos, the options I've picked. You can also see that I filled out the record ID box there. So we're going to import this one now. I'm going to say, yes, I want to see the data prior to importing. I'm going to let it auto number my records actually. Yeah, we're going to do it this way. So now you can see, so I've got a tentative new record, record 2 for Gandalf the Grey. And these are all of the data elements that I'm going to import. Nothing looks weird. I'm not seeing any signs that I'm going to overwrite something. So I can import that data. And then over on my record status dashboard, that data is in here now. So this is what it looks like when I click into the record status dashboard. But there are some different things that can cause issues during that import process that REDCap will throw an error about. So let's start off with no record ID. So I said earlier that you need to have that record ID filled out so that REDCap knows how to associate that data, how to assign it to the right person, even if you are going to let it auto name and overwrite. So let's come import the no record ID file. I'm going to say use record auto numbering, and it's still going to yell at me. So it won't allow me to import like this. I have to go back and put in a record ID. Even if it's just going to be a placeholder, I need a record ID. There's also invalid data. So if I have data that doesn't comply with the rules that I have. So I have this field where my pre-cancer diagnosis for, instead of typing a 1 or a 0, I've typed yes. So that's not valid data for this field type. I have text here that's going to be in a number validated field. And then here I have a field that's supposed to be a date field. This is a validated date field. This is recurrence date. And I've just got a string of numbers here. I don't have an actual date. So that's also invalid data. Now I don't want to save the changes. All right. So if I go to my data import tool and I try to import this file with the invalid data, you're going to see that I'm getting errors about this. I've got a 4 in a checkbox field. I can't do that. It has to be 0 or 1. I've got text in a checkbox field that has to be 0 or 1. I've got text in a number validated field, has to be a number. And I've got something that is definitely not a date in my date field. So those are all errors that I would have to go back and correct on my upload, my import file before I can actually import this data. It will not let me proceed. So those are types of errors that REDCap will actually stop you for, the blank record ID and the invalid data. But there are other things that it won't stop. So there are errors that don't get flagged by the import tool. So let's say I have some out of range values. So in here, you can see that for this person's blood urea nitrogen, I have a value of 300. That's way out of range. But REDCap's not going to stop me from importing that. And that's actually a good thing, because the thing about out of range values is that they absolutely happen in real life. They are a very real part of the world, happen all the time. So it's not throwing any errors as I do this. It's just going to let me import. There we go. And then when I come in here to record 5, the new record I just made, if I touch that field again, so my bun field, that's when it flags as out of range. The value is admissible, but I may wish to double check it. So that's when I'll get that warning message. I won't get the warning message during import. And again, it's good that REDCap will let you import an out of range value because those are a real thing that happen and you need to be able to import them. You can also have required fields that haven't been filled out. And again, this is something where if you think about entering it on the form, REDCap would put a pop-up there and tell you those fields are required, but it would in fact let you save this data. So we see here that I have my missing first name and last name. So let's come into my import tool. These are my required missing import documents. Use record auto numbering. Okay. You can see I've got my tentative new record. My first name and last name fields are blank, and it doesn't matter. It's going to let me do that anyway. If I come in here and then I go to save, now it tells me, hey, you left these blank, but it doesn't stop me during the import process or even alert me during the import process. And finally, I can have a branching logic violation. So I come in here to this import document. So here I've got my precancer diagnosis option that is for other cancers, right? That's option 6, other cancers. That says no. But then my specify other cancer field, I have filled it out. And so that is a violation of my branching logic. If I were entering this on the form directly, it wouldn't let me do that. I wouldn't be able to see this field if I had marked no here. But during data import, it's not going to stop me. Okay, I've got that. Use auto numbering. Okay. And you can see here, it's not even saying anything about it. It doesn't say a peep. I import it. But then if I go to the record status dashboard, now I get the pop-up saying that there's an issue with the branching logic. So the current field I've entered data for other cancers when I've said that there were no other cancers. So if you click OK to this, it will erase the data that you imported to the field that's supposed to be hidden by branching logic. Click cancel. Click cancel because you want to take a look at that data first. So here I can take a look at my data and I can see, okay, other cancer isn't checked, but I've specified another cancer. So I can look back at my data and check and see, okay, is this a mistake where I should have checked other cancer? Or is this a mistake where pancreas shouldn't have been there? And either way, I can correct it. But if I click OK on that error message, I lose that data. So click cancel on that error message. In general, there are things that REDCap will just plain not be able to check for you. As long as the values are valid in REDCap, they'll be imported, even if that value doesn't match your original data, because REDCap has no access to that information. It can't check that you assigned all your values correctly. So that means that as we're doing this data cleaning and getting it ready for import, we need to be doing our own checks, and we need to think about that with our workflow too. Because this is something that is just not within the capacity of REDCap to check for you. So that's how the import process works in kind of a basic project where you've just got your records going straight across. It gets more complicated when you have longitudinal projects and repeating forms. So I'm going to come into another of my projects here. This is my complex project. So you can see this one, I have a longitudinal data collection. I also have some repeating instruments. And this is where that record ID becomes incredibly important because when you are using multiple events like this, you can see in data exports, reports, and stats, how this is formatted on the back end of REDCap. But each record ID occupies multiple lines based on the events and the repetitions. And that's how it keeps the data associated with that record. So it's not that every row is going to be a separate record now. There can be multiple rows that are part of the same record, and that's why it's so important to have that record ID specified. So this is one that's set up to have some different data coming in. So when we have a longitudinal project, we need that record ID. The other thing we need is the REDCap event name, because my labs form lives under multiple events. REDCap needs to know which event to associate these labs with. If I'm just adding a new set of labs, like a new instance of a repeating form, I can put new and REDCap will just cool, not overwrite anything. If I have the number specified, it will try to make it that instance number. So you want to check that and make sure you're not overwriting an existing instance of your data. So repeating instruments, they need to be on a separate row for each repeat instance, with the repeat instrument name, repeat instance, record ID, and if applicable, event name listed. So you can see here, the REDCap repeat instrument name. That's what's going on here. So for this information here, that's not a repeatable form, doesn't matter. So I don't have that repeat instrument name or repeat instance, but this is one of my repeating forms. So I need to have that information here. You can find your instrument and event names in the code book. So if I come into my code book here, this is where I get that form name, labs. This is where I get my event names, baseline ARM1, month 1 ARM1, month 2 ARM1. This is where I get that information to fill out my import spreadsheet. Since the record, event, and instance are specified on every row, you technically can organize your rows by any factor you want, whether it's the patient, the visit number, the date of visit. But we recommend picking a format and sticking with it, because that makes it easier to catch mistakes and ensure nothing is forgotten. I personally prefer to organize it by person. So having the same record grouped together. So this is record 1, this is record 2. To me, that is the easiest to read. And then I group by event name and generally try to keep similar information together. So now I'm going to X out of this guy and we will import it. So let's go into our data import tool. And that's going to be my longitudinal repeating import. I do want to use the record names provided. All right. So you can see here that I have an existing record for record 1, and I'm just adding a bunch of new instances of their labs. So everything else is pretty much blank, and then I've got their new labs coming in. You can see here, so this would be something to look at with concern if I was doing this import and realized, oh no, I'm importing something else over my existing record 2. I'd better change that. Maybe I need to make Gimli record 3 because I've already got Keeley's data here in record 2. So I would actually want to stop this import here. And change my record IDs. So now I know record 2 is actually claimed. So I'm just going to update all of Gimli's information to record 3 and save that. And now let's do this again. Yes, display, no use the record name provided. Okay. So now we can see that Gimli is starting over on a new record. That's what we want. But also that my existing record, I am adding in my new lab forms. So that's how I want this to look. That's what I want from this. All right. So then if I come to my record status dashboard, you can see I've got all these new instances of my labs, and I've got multiple repetitions of my labs because I uploaded 2 sets of labs for month 1, right? I had 2 month 1 repeat instances for record 1 of my labs. So that is how they work for adding information via import with longitudinal and repeating data. You got to keep track of those repeat forms and those those events, those instances. REDCap will match on the record ID field. Make sure you're specifying your event names and things like that. The other place that the import process gets interesting is when you have data access groups. So let's go into my data access group demo project. So when you have data access groups, you have to specify the record ID and the data access group on every row associated with a record. And you have to keep the same DAG for each record ID. So different record IDs can be in different DAGs, but the same record needs to consistently be in the same DAG. And that includes not leaving that DAG field blank. So if I leave a DAG field blank, REDCap doesn't, keep that as blank. It takes that as this is not associated with a DAG, and it will not let you import if that conflicts with the previous DAG assignment. So the way that the DAGs work, if a user is assigned to a DAG, they can only upload records to that data access group. You don't have to specify the DAG if you're doing that. It will be auto-assigned. You can use the DAG swisher if you're in multiple DAGs to import to your currently selected DAG. If you want to import multiple data access groups, so data sets from multiple DAGs, this has to be done either by a user who is not assigned to a DAG, so someone who's able to view all the records, or they can be separated out to be imported under the correct DAG. So let's look at some DAG-related data sets. So you can see here, I've got some data import here, and I'm actually going to view this project as a user. One of my coworkers very kindly let me set up her user rights. Okay, so you can see that I'm currently in the data access group Gondor. So now let's go into the data import tool. And you can see that because this person is assigned to a DAG, and I had multiple DAGs assigned, including ones that she's not in right now. So I had some people assigned to the Gondor, but I also had Lonely Mountain and the Shire. That won't let me do that, right? This person is only in the Gondor DAG right now. They can only import records in the Gondor DAG. However, if I'm viewing this as myself, I'm not assigned to one of the DAGs. So I can still come in here and I can upload people to Gondor, people to the Lonely Mountain, people to the Shire, people who have no DAG. I can upload all of that. That's fine for me to do because I'm not assigned to a DAG, so I can import that data. But people who are assigned to a DAG cannot do that. They can only import to the DAG that they are currently attached to. And you can see that this project, I have both repeating forms and data access groups. So I'm preparing to put in some labs for this person. And I do have my DAG assigned there. So let's look at that repeating form import. And this is the error message that I get, trying to assign multiple data access groups per record. And what's going on with that, and this is happening even though I have access to all of them, doesn't matter, because this person what I've done is I've said, okay, they're in this data access group on this line, and then I didn't say the same data access group here. I left it blank. So that's that error. So I have to update that. I have to make sure they both have the same data access group. And then I will be able to import. So there you go. Now, because I've got him in a consistent data access group, now I'm able to import that information. So I'm just going to show you something with the DAG switcher real quick. So once again, I'm viewing this with the user privileges of someone who is assigned to a couple of different DAGs. So if I press this switch button up here, this person has access to the data access groups Gondor and Lonely Mountain. So I can switch between them. But even though I have access to both of those groups, I can't upload to both of them at the same time. So here I have a person from the Gondor data access group and a person from the Lonely Mountain data access group. But even though my user has access to both of those DAGs, it won't let me do that. I can only upload to the data access group that I'm currently in. So what I would have to do is I would have to separate this into two different documents. So out of this one, I'm going to delete my Gondor one. I'm going to save this as import DAG Lonely Mountain. Save that in that folder. And then for this one, I would delete that row. So now I'm going to trim this down to just people in the Gondor DAG. And I'm going to save this as import DAGs Gondor. And so now what I have to do, okay, right now I'm in my Gondor DAG. So I can only import the Gondor ones. And you can see after I've done that bit of organizing, I still have an extra step to do because I can't have that field filled out at all if I am someone who's assigned to a DAG. So I have to just delete that column. But it's important to make sure I'm checking those DAGs as I get things ready. So let's fix the Lonely Mountain one too, because that's going to be an issue for us in a minute here. Okay, delete that column there. All right. So now I have my data broken down by DAGs. I don't have the DAG column in it anymore because I can't use it if I'm assigned to a DAG. But it's important to know which DAG I need to be in to upload that data. So right now I'm in current data access group Gondor, and I'm going to upload the Gondor CSV. And we're just going to use record auto numbering because those record numbers already exist and they are in different data access groups. So that's another aspect. All right. So now you can see now it is letting me import. That is another important aspect, though, is that records that are already assigned to a DAG can also only have stuff uploaded by someone who is part of that DAG or who has access to all records by not being part of any DAG. So now I'm able to do that import. So there's my Gondor import. And then I would switch to the Lonely Mountain DAG and choose my Lonely Mountain CSV and use my auto numbering. Ooh, I accidentally saved that as an Excel file. So let me get in here. And I need to save this as a CSV instead of an Excel document. And that is something that Excel does allow you to do. You're allowed to create a file in Excel and then save it as a CSV. Just know if you used any fancy Excel features, it might not transfer over to your CSV. So be careful what you do in Excel. There we go. Now I have my CSV. I'm in the right data access group. And you can see now it's letting me import this data. And if I come out to stop viewing as user and I go look at all of my data access groups. So let's look at the Gondor ones. You see that the one I just uploaded in the Gondor group, that shows up as part of Gondor. And then Lonely Mountain, the one I just uploaded for Lonely Mountain group, is also in the Lonely Mountain tag. And that is our overview of the data import tool. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have office hours every Thursday from 12 to 2 p.m. and you can sign up in that link in the PowerPoint. If you are more of this meeting could have been an email person, we also have a support ticket system, so you can always submit a ticket and we can handle your issue via messaging back and forth. Or if you are more of a screen share, this email should have been a meeting person, absolutely sign up for office hours. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day.